Celebrating 49 years on the air, award-winning Farmweek is a production of Mississippi State University Extension.
Today on Farm Week, plans to move USDA offices gets a little pushback. Plus, in Mississippi, catfish is king, but elsewhere it's big for a whole nother reason. In southern gardening, hibiscus is both hardy and hypnotic. Eddie has a showcase. And in our feature, making sure farmland stays farmland. A big-time legal maneuver. Farm Week starts right now.
Hello everyone, I'm Zach Ashmore.
And I'm Mike Russell. Great to have you with us again here on Farm Week. You may have heard that once again, the White House is working to reorganize the USDA and move its offices out of D.C. But a lot of folks are also once again asking questions. Peter Tubbs has the story.
The Senate Agriculture Committee heard testimony about the Department of Agriculture's plan to reassign staff currently based in Washington, D.C. to 5 cities around the country. Senators questioned the USDA over the likelihood of current staff accepting transfers and whether the selection process has already been completed.
A relocation for a family is a big deal.
It is.
What do you think will happen?
Senator, I think actually a large number of them will choose to come. I think many of them will choose to come because given cuts made by other federal agencies here in Washington, D.C., the job market isn't what it once was here. And I think that the exciting opportunity these new hubs provide for them to actually be able to own a home affordably and grow and expand their family with the lower cost of living, that's one of the primary reasons we chose each of these 5 hubs, will attract them to come.
As we look at the 5 sites, like from my part of the world, there's nothing within 600 miles of us, from Fargo, North Dakota, for example. And we're in the heart of ag country.
We couldn't put offices everywhere. And we learned some lessons from the ERS NIFA relocation in term 1. One of the most important lessons that we learned was instead of looking all over the map, literally, for where we should go if we're looking to relocate, the first thing we should do is see where we already are.
But there's a difference between you selecting 5 hubs on your own and saying, okay, we're at the start of the plan, but this is the plan, and we're going to talk about it, but this is the plan. That's different than if we work together and come up with a plan that people have had input, they've been fairly heard and fairly treated, and it may be different than 5 hubs, and it may be different than these locations, and it may be different in form and function, but it is something that ultimately this Congress has something to say about, both from an authorizing standpoint and certainly from an appropriation standpoint.
40 years ago, there were more than 30 major freight railroads. Today, there are only 6. One of them, Norfolk Southern, runs through Mississippi. But even that name may change soon in a merger. David Miller has more.
Rail giants Union Pacific and Norfolk Southern have agreed to a merger valued at $85 billion. If approved, the 2 companies would come together under the Union Pacific label, control over 50,000 miles of track in 43 states, and be the first transcontinental railroad in U.S. history under a single brand. Matthew Gustafson is a professor of finance at Penn State University.
Before they go through the operational challenges of, figuring out how to allocate their employees across the newly formed company, they're going to wait and see what the regulatory agencies say about things.
According to company data, Union Pacific moves 1.6 million carloads of grain annually, and Norfolk Southern transports 18,107 carloads of grain and grain mill products every year. Union Pacific CEO Jim Vena says they hope to eliminate $1 billion in costs annually, and no union members should lose their jobs. However, the workforce could shrink due to attrition. SMART-TD, the nation's largest rail union, opposes the merger over worry it will jeopardize progress Norfolk Southern has made in safety and labor relations since the 2023 derailment in East Palestine, Ohio. The Transport Workers Union echoed those concerns by saying the deal delivers, quote, billions to Wall Street while workers get shafted, unquote. The two companies hope to get approval for the deal from the Federal Surface Transportation Board by early 2027.
Did you know that Mississippi produces 2/3 of the nation's catfish? Catfish is king. But elsewhere, they have a different opinion of our favorite feast, and it turns out they have a lot on hand. Reporter Brad Bell has more.
This is the fish processing line at Tillman Island Seafood on Maryland's eastern shore, and those are blue catfish being turned into fillets. They are an invasive species whose population in the Chesapeake has exploded in recent years. Problem is they eat everything in the water, especially crabs. And that is why owner Nick Hargrove decided to start this business.
Maryland being a crab state, we don't want anything to happen to our beloved crabs, so the blue catfish kind of became public enemy number one.
So how big a problem are blue catfish? Well, last year, watermen brought to the dock more than 4 million pounds of the fish, and it is estimated that there are 1 billion pounds of blue catfish in bay waters now. Currently, the strategy to control them is to catch as many as possible, get them to market and onto menus, but places like Tillman Island Seafood have had trouble ramping up production, which is why today, U.S. Secretary of Agriculture Brooke Rollins, along with Maryland Congressman Andy Harris, were on Tillman Island to announce both a program to buy $2 million worth of catfish for food banks and a new grant program, which makes $6 million available to help grow the industry. Hargrove says the money will make all the difference.
Grants like this really help us to get with the times and to be able to ramp up our production. There's market out there that we've already established, and so this couldn't have came at a better time for us.
Looking for the ultimate in colorful, showy plants for your landscape? Here's Eddie Smith with a super showcase of the hardy yet heavenly hibiscus.
Perennial hardy hibiscus is one of those garden essentials that delivers unmatched color and impact during the summer months. I'm in Crystal Springs, Mississippi, surrounded by an impressive collection of hardy hibiscus that are truly stealing the spotlight. One of the most striking varieties is Summerific Garnet Globes, with its deep cherry red blooms that are as rich in color as they are in texture. The velvety petals overlap in full, cupped form that naturally draws the eye to the flower center, where the delicate stamens and pistil seem to float above the intense red backdrop. Equally stunning is Summerific Edge of Night, a variety that pairs glowing pink blooms with some of the darkest foliage you'll ever find on any hibiscus. The 7 to 8 inch wide flowers have soft ruffled petals and deep red centers that radiate outward, creating a vibrant contrast against its leaves. The effect is almost luminous, as if the flowers are glowing from within. For a more compact option, Head Over Heels Adore delivers just as much color in a smaller package. Its large, rosy pink flowers exude softness and romance, each bloom highlighted by a vivid crimson eye. This variety's rich burgundy green foliage adds an extra layer of contrast that makes the bloom stand out even more. If you are looking to make a bold statement in your garden, hardy hibiscus is a surefire way to add dramatic color and tropical flair. I'm Eddie Smith. I will see you next time on Southern Gardening.
We'll take a break right here, but don't go away. Coming up in our Farm Week feature, making sure farmland stays farmland. Right now, as some states grow and people move around, we're losing about 2,000 acres of farmland a day to development. Experts say we could lose another 18 million over the next decade. But there is a way to permanently protect farmland and maybe even reduce taxes in the process. It's not for everyone, but it's realistic. Protecting ag land, coming up on Farm Week. Don't go away.
I believe in people and their hopes, their aspirations and their faith, and their right to make their own plans and arrive at their own decisions, and their ability and power to enlarge their lives and plan for the happiness of those they love. I believe that education, of which extension work is an essential part, is basic in stimulating individual initiative, self-determination, and leadership. That these are the keys to democracy, and that people, when given facts they understand, will act not only in their self-interest, but also in the interest of society. Because I believe these things, I am an extension professional.
I believe in people and their hopes, their aspirations, and their faith. I believe in intellectual freedom to search for and present the truth without bias and with courteous tolerance toward the views of others. I believe that education is a lifelong process, and the greatest university is the home. That my success as a teacher is proportional to those qualities of mind and spirit that give me welcome entrance to the homes of the families I serve. Because I believe these things, I am an extension professional.
Time for the market report. Row crops still falling. Indeed, and we'll get into the reasons, along with cattle prices are rising. But first, the numbers. What were the week's biggest gains and losses? And then, what's moving the row crop markets? An expert weighs in. And finally, MSU livestock economist Dr. Josh Maples talks about cattle and how things are looking up. So, markets closed once again, trending down. Row crops hit the most. Let's take a look. The week's biggest gain, live cattle, up over 2.25 cents, more than a 1% increase from the previous week. The week's biggest loss, lumber, down 43 bucks. That's more than a 6% decrease from the previous week. So, row crop prices falling. We've been talking about it for the past several weeks, and potential reasons. How much longer will it last, and will there be a turnaround? Well, market analyst Don Rose says it looks like international competition is one of the reasons.
Well, you know, it's just competition. I think we got to be the cheapest wheat in the world, cheapest corn, and the cheapest soybeans. But then when you rally just a little bit, we become uncompetitive. It's that tight of a market. So I would say it's, and that's what you mean when you're trying to forge a bottom. You know, it's one that takes time to build a base. Yeah, I think when you look at the corn, it's last year we bottomed at 360.5 on September corn. So we're well over that right now. So far this year we went to like 370, just over 375. So the timing, last year we bottomed August 24th. So you're in that window that you could, but I think it's one of these markets we're trying to see where end user demand really picks up. We're trying to see, you know, when these spreads start to narrow in a little bit. When old crop supplies get cleared. So I think it's just one of those that takes time. It's the wrong time of year to be overly positive on the grain market going into harvest. We've got pressure from the south. The Delta's starting to harvest corn. They probably harvested so far 70 million bushels. Put it in perspective, Louisiana's about 25–30% harvested. So we're getting pressure from that. But at the same time on new crop, you know, you're seeing very limited selling here. For a lot of people, you're down at below break even, so it's kind of a caution on making new sales. What we've seen is our new crop export sales have been very good on corn so far, but that's mainly because people pre-buying because of the tariffs coming on place. But, you know, exports could be well overstated in corn and on soybeans. A lot of it's going to be dependent on what happens with trade and these tariffs going forward. It's very much an unknown so far.
This past year, cattle prices have been slowly going up, by nearly 16.5% since January 1st. Looks like the cattle rebuild's still happening along with other factors. I spoke with Dr. Josh Maples about it, and he says it's a good time to be a cattle farmer.
So really positive on the cattle side right now. We've got prices that we've never seen before. Producers who are selling calves right now are making more revenue on those calves than they've ever made before. And we're just, quite frankly, we've seen highest cattle prices across pretty much all types of cattle. So all the way from fed cattle that are getting turned into beef, feeder cattle going into feedlots, those calves that we just mentioned earlier, and then also cull cows and bulls. So right now the landscape is, it's a good time to be in the cattle business. You know, beef demand has been really strong, and that's a big piece of this is beef prices are high, consumers are still paying them right now. We see really strong prices for beef and strong consumption of beef. Beef demand, whenever cattle supplies are tight, have kind of gotten us into this environment that we are seeing really, really strong prices for cattle. Cull cow markets are really interesting, and I think that's a key piece here about where we go from here. Because if you think about what's got to change for us to get more calves next year or the year after that, it's got to be we need more cows, right? And so cull cow markets have really shot up in terms of value. And so we've got a smaller cow herd, so there's fewer cull cows out there. And our cull cows typically go into ground beef type products. And so whenever we've got a smaller cow herd, that's more demand for those cows to be ground beef, but those cows are also in demand to be productive for next year. And so to me, that's a really interesting piece here at this point in the cycle is, you know, as producers are making those culling decisions, they can get more for that cow than they've ever gotten before as a cull, but they also need that cow in order to produce a calf next year. Those type of decisions are really going to drive what we see in terms of expansion. Happening right now. Most of our calves in Mississippi are born in the springtime, so we're at the point where you're weaning those calves. And this is a key point in which producers are making the decision of what do I do with my heifers? Do I send them off to feedlots, or do I sell them to be stocker cattle and ultimately feedlot cattle? Or do I hold back some of those heifers to try to develop them so they'll be producing calves on my operation in the future? That's one piece. The other piece is the cull cow piece. And so as I'm making a decision, hey, this cow, you know, weaned this calf, do I want to keep her around for another year? Both of those decisions made, every individual producer is going to make it for their operation, but how producers make that on a state level, national level is really going to drive what we're talking about in terms of expansion. Right now, we don't see clear signs of expansion yet, but I think this fall is going to go a long way in telling us about what we're looking at the next few years.
And that's it for a deeper look into the markets. Mike?
Thanks, Zach. The last ag census reported 20 million U.S. farmland acres lost to development between 2017 and 2022, about 2/3 the size of Mississippi. But there is a way to preserve farmland acres permanently. Here's Colleen Bradford-Krantz.
Kira Santiago's Central Illinois flower farm exists thanks to a legal maneuver by landowner Dave Bishop to protect his East Peoria farm, which Santiago now rents, from development pressure. Bishop, who also owns a farm near Atlanta, Illinois, couldn't bear to sell the 100 acres, first purchased in 1868 by his great-great-grandfather and farmed by each subsequent generation.
It is ideal development property because you've got some trees already, as well as some flat land. So there is a lot of development interest. If you look at from the air, you will see a subdivision that is poised to attack, as well as East Peoria city limits just across the field.
Despite encroaching housing developments, he put off numerous interested buyers over the last 20 years.
It's quite often likely to be double the price of farmland, typical farmland. If the land doesn't mean anything to you and it's just an opportunity for profit, I can see how people would do that. Since I have a 5-generation vested interest in this land, it means something to me.
5 years ago, Bishop learned about agricultural conservation easements, a way to permanently protect land for agricultural use only. It meant sacrificing development potential for preservation.
You don't do that in a knee-jerk reaction type of way, if you know, because you're giving up a significant income potential. But if you do decide to proceed with it, you need to find someone who acts on your behalf in setting all this up.
Bishop's loss was covered by USDA and the Conservation Fund, and Illinois-based Prairie Lands Conservancy holds the easement. Similar groups across the nation help achieve the same goal. The nonprofit American Farmland Trust, founded in 1980, is a national leader when it comes to efforts to permanently protect farmland, especially in high development areas. The organization connects landowners to state and local land trusts and helps guide lawmakers.
We're losing about 2,000 acres a day to development pressure. And so our approach as an organization is to promote farmland protection programs that are voluntary, that offer farmers and landowners the opportunity to protect that land with an ag conservation easement, which in turn allows that land to stay in agriculture for perpetuity.
At the current pace of 2,000 acres lost to development daily from 2001 to 2016, another 18 million acres will likely disappear by 2040, nearly the size of South Carolina. Reynolds, who is a fifth-generation farmer, worries about feeding the nation if poorly planned development continues on prime agricultural soils.
Those are lands that we refer to as prime, versatile, and resilient, because essentially there's a lot of options of what can be grown on those lands now and into the future.
The process of gaining an agricultural land easement involves third-party land trusts, legal costs, and often waiting lists. Farmland is appraised at its current value versus its value with restrictions against development. The difference becomes the easement cost, sometimes donated by landowners, sometimes 50% covered by a land trust, and possibly the other 50% by a federal, state, or municipal program.
It doesn't mean that you're giving anybody else access to that land, but it does mean that that land is going to stay in agriculture.
As the value of the land is reduced by giving up development potential, the property tax burden could ease. Once established, protected land can still be sold, but new owners must maintain agricultural use. Currently, 30 states have agricultural easement programs, but most Midwestern states, including Illinois, Iowa, and Indiana, lack state government purchase programs. Reynolds encourages allowing for future flexibility when it comes to farming types and farming practices.
For the most part, the easement language, it needs to be fairly open, because we don't know what agriculture might look like in 100 years. So it doesn't need to be so restrictive that we're saying that it has to be corn and soybeans produced on this farm.
Very little land, less than 1% nationwide, is currently protected by agricultural conservation easements. Florida, which is expecting another 10 million new residents by 2070, is using several types of legal maneuvers, including this kind of easement, to try to save farmland and other green spaces.
Seems like the rate is at least on the order of 60,000 acres of rural land lost a year based on our newest estimate. In Florida, the pace of development is probably faster than anywhere else in the U.S. We have really good data. Do we have the political will to get it done? There's a lot of agricultural land that we could protect if we're proactive. We have the opportunity to do that. Them staying in agriculture is completely compatible with our long-term conservation goals.
As for Dave Bishop in Illinois, his children supported the idea of locking the land into agricultural uses. After several years of preparation, the assessment revealed the difference between development and agricultural values was several $100,000.
We used some of the easement money to repaint and work on the house, do some repairs on it. The entire roof had to be replaced on the barn and some other work done on it. The amount of money that we got from the easement was enough to keep this in shape for, another 30 years, hopefully.
The conservation group checks the farm annually to ensure compliance. Bishop's youngest son hopes to eventually farm the East Peoria land which is currently rented by Santiago, the flower farmer, to serve metro area residents in the future. It's a possibility the easement helped protect.
It's not for everybody. There is no question about that. The point for me was, I know now that this land will always be a farm.
Where there's a will, there's a way. Well, next week, a follow-up episode of On the Farm. You met them before here on Farm Week. Longtime father and son dairy farmers David and Will Gilmer made the choice years ago to get out of the dairy business.
Costs were up, profit was down. They decided to try their hand at beef cattle. But the beef cattle business comes with its own challenges, including a steep learning curve.
On the Farm, a follow-up next time on Farm Week. Before we say goodbye, congratulations to a whole bunch of folks at Mississippi State's Division of Agriculture, Forestry, and Veterinary Medicine. They gathered at a luau-themed summit recently to have a little fun, and many of them also won professional awards in 5 categories: teaching, research, outreach, service, and international efforts.
DAFM, as it's known, produced just under $2 billion of economic impact to Mississippi last year. That's about half of the university's total economic impact to the state. Congratulations. Remember, if you missed a story, look for past episodes of Farm Week on our website at farmweek.tv.
And don't forget to follow us on Facebook and YouTube. See you next week. Thanks for watching.